Hello, everyone. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. Today is Tuesday, and it's going to be like day 6, I think, of our FileMaker training with Leland Long. In fact, if I pop up the button right here, this is Leland Long. This is JavaScript for the Claris FileMaker platform. And we've already been spending about an hour and a half, hour, 10 minutes every day on this. And we're about halfway through, maybe at this point. So let's talk about what's going on, what's coming up, and what's happening. So if you go to fmtraining.tv, you can check out the upcoming schedule. So you got FM Training TV. This live training button right here is available. And so we're going to talk more about jQuery today, etc. So day 1 started really at the basics. I had a couple people, in fact, a couple of the newer staff that we hired, and they're like, yeah, that was pretty basic. So I was kind of bored. Then the next day it was like starting to get harder. And I'm like, yeah, it was really Bambi level basic day 1. But the point is that we're progressively, or Leland is progressively taking it through the training. It's really quite great. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to get through this week. We're going to have Monday of next week, which is the last day of the free training, but it's not the end of the JavaScript training. If you go to fmtraining.tv and you click the JavaScript training button on the right here, where my mouse is spinning around, you can go to the React Native Apps with FileMaker JavaScript trainings. We talked about it yesterday, but the idea is that we're going to take week 1, week 2, and there is a paid week 3. So if you want to support Leland, and you value the training that you're getting, please feel free to come down here and purchase week 3 of the training. If you're interested in building, I would call pro code level FileMaker front ends for iPhone and Android, with what Leland is doing in the paid training, you'll be able to, using pro code techniques that we're teaching you down with JavaScript, you're going to use the React Native kind of platform. It allows you to build an iOS app and an executable Android app essentially with one code base. It's pretty great. So every once in a while I was getting emails, hey Rick, are you doing Macs or Windows, and why are you this and that? And it's like, it's React Native is Facebook. So it's their platform that they developed. They don't really care what you use, right, for the most part. So it's not really a Mac thing. It's not really a Windows thing. It just works on both. Or Android thing per se. Yep. So, and that's Google. So anyway, that's what's coming up starting on March 6th. So that's a whole week, another 5 days of training. That'll be about 3 p.m. Pacific time, approximately 90 minutes. Once again, that will depend upon how things are going and what kind of questions are asked. It is recorded, so if you pay for it, you also get the recordings, right? Pretty great. If you want to catch the recordings so far that we've had, the free recordings, you can click the button right here. We'll send this link to everyone as well. You can scroll down here and see the recordings. So we're up through day 4 now. It's been loaded all the way through day 4. And then down here will be the paid training once it comes up. But you'll only be able to access it if you've paid the $2.99 and you have the license key for it. Then all this stuff that you'll see down here will magically turn on. So that's kind of the plug. Leland, as much as he wants to volunteer his time for the FileMaker community, and trust me, he's not getting rich on this, it would be useful to if we incentivize him and he makes a couple bucks on this deal, then he'll want to come back and do other training. And I think most of you have noticed he's a really good instructor. Anyway, so that's what's coming up on the schedule. Once again, recommend that you buy the paid part to incentivize the instructor to come back. It's really great. Some of you have already purchased the training. We greatly appreciate your commitment to seeing this through. It's awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this down. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Leland been doing this for a long time, and this is kind of Leland's backstory. He's an in-house developer. He's done a number of free add-ons and various sample files for the FileMaker community. And he's also, if you haven't seen this, the FM Arcade. In fact, Margaret, so we have a sample file it was a sample file for last week. This week we have a different sample file. Margaret's going to post that to Twitch, YouTube, and Discord, since we're broadcasting in high definition to all 3 platforms simultaneously. And then Margaret also posts the link to FM Arcade, which has Pac-Man. That's why you hear the Pac-Man music, because Leland took JavaScript and has JavaScript driving Pac-Man through FileMaker. It's crazy because the JavaScript can actually process code faster, but so kind of JavaScript's kind of the back end, and then the front display part of it is being driven through a FileMaker layout with like 4,000 container fields on it or something really, what I would consider normally screwed up, but if you look at it run, it's really quite impressive. So it's really great. All right, cool. Well, let me jet out of here. We're going to stop sharing. We're going to transfer command to Leland. Are you ready, Leland?
Leland is in the house.
He is in the house.
Now he's sharing it. Hopefully
We
now
are.
he's sharing his screen.
We see the screen. It's nice and big. All right. So what are we doing today, and why do we care, Leland Long?
Last week was JavaScript 101. We kind of covered the basics all the way through bookwork, kind of understanding syntax and all the ins and outs of some of the minor and basic foundational building blocks of being able to write and read your own JavaScript. This week, starting off yesterday with JavaScript 102, we are using a JavaScript library, a common one called jQuery. And yesterday we explored various different ways of selecting things in your own homemade HTML in the web viewer and then altering it, doing things with it using jQuery. Today we're going to continue on with that same thread, but this time we're going to start using web viewers that are actually bringing in information off of the internet. So we're not going to be generating our own HTML. We're going to start looking at and start figuring out ways that we can work with somebody else's web page within a web viewer within FileMaker. So I'm going to jump right to our section 5, which is called Get Data. And in this particular example, I've changed it to load YouTube's initial site. So if I go into layout mode and you take a look at the address that's being populated in this web viewer, as soon as this record or this page is being rendered or drawn on screen, this web viewer is going out just like you would on a browser and typing this into the URL address bar, and it is pulling down the current web page, which is the starter index web page of youtube.com. And so when you're in browse mode and that happens, you see a little bit of a pause as it grabs data and begins rendering it. And you can scroll through here and you see what YouTube currently looks like today on this browser. All well and good. As you know, in the past, yesterday with all of the other sections that we did, sections 1 through 4, we were creating our own HTML, populating it into the web viewer and dealing with it. But we also were including the jQuery library in our code. So we captured it locally within a script, populated it in the web viewer, and used it along with our HTML. So YouTube is an example of a web page that does not have jQuery loaded on its own. Some web pages do, some don't. If we go to the web inspector, which you learned previously how to access and look at, we can look at behind the scenes of what's going on with youtube.com. And there's a few errors that occurred probably with advertising or something, who knows what, but unimportant to us, the user was not presented with an error. If we go in here, I'm going to jump over to my code really quick. We will cover this a little later, but I just want to copy and paste this line right here, which says, hey, tell me the current version of jQuery if and when it's there. So I grabbed it, I copied it. I'm going to come back to our web inspector, and down here in this console or terminal, I'm just going to type in this command jQuery .jQuery, and it's going to give me back the version number of jQuery that's installed on this in our web viewer, and it doesn't exist. So in this case, I could not just start to write jQuery code to use because this web page does not utilize that library. Well, that sounds like bad news, but thanks to Matt Petrowski, I knew it was probably feasible, but I wasn't sure exactly how to go about it. And he showed how we can inject jQuery into our web page. So I'm going to kind of go through the same steps that he did in a slightly different fashion, fine-tuned for what I want it to do. And I'm going to hit my jQuery button here. And now jQuery has been loaded into this web page. You didn't see anything, right? Well, you're not going to. But if I come back here, we've got a console log that says jQuery loaded version 3.6.1. And now if I paste in that same function that we did before, which is, hey, show me the version of that of jQuery that's loaded on the web page, we don't get an error anymore. We actually get a response. So that's kind of a confirmation that, hey, we just injected JavaScript into this web page. Okay. But I want to get the concept out there of what it is we're doing and what the code does.
Yeah, so we're baking the cake later, but we're showing you the completed cake now, and it's very tasty. And now we're going to bake the cake.
So let me kind of recap. We loaded our web page. We ran a query on the current version of jQuery, and we got back can't find. So it didn't exist. Then I hit my magic button, which we'll look at as far as what it does.
That was the part.
that's the part that said jQuery loaded. Then I reran the same function that we did before, and now we actually have a value.
Okay.
Okay. Now that explains part of one thing, and I want to explain something else, which is part of how this happens. I'm going to go back into layout mode, which wipes out the web viewer. I'm going to go back into browse mode, so that's going to reload our web page, and I'm going to go back to the web inspector. And I'm going to do the same thing again, just to make sure that we don't have jQuery loaded, right? So we're getting the anticipated error. There's no jQuery loaded. But something else I want to show you is that this web viewer has had some things added to it. If we go to the FileMaker object of this web viewer and we tell it to show us information on it, you can see that there's an object in this web page, in this web viewer now, called FileMaker. And this is two methods that are available for us to use from within FileMaker to apply to this web page, right? And we've been using it now for the last several days. This is how, when we call FileMaker.performScript, this is how it works, because what FileMaker or Claris has done is that when the web viewer is loaded here in your layout, they quietly in the background add their own object called FileMaker, and they add two methods so that method is available no matter what web page you have within the web viewer, right? So that's part of that magic. Well, wouldn't it be cool if, since Claris/FileMaker put in their own object into the web viewer, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we could do that ourselves? And come to find out, you can. And that's actually how I brought jQuery into the page. I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily add your own JavaScript and or libraries to an existing web page. Now, just to clarify, for those of you that don't really know the exact inner workings of the magical World Wide Web or internet, this web page is served and is hosted on a server somewhere on the planet somewhere. And when you type in www.youtube.com, there's a DNS lookup that happens to find the actual real physical address of that server, which is typically 4 numbers separated by dots, right? You've seen that, a static IP address.
Yep.
And what happens between my browser here and that web server there is a bunch of communication starts. And basically our web viewer says, hey, give me back this page at this address. And so that server responds and it sends back that web page to this address, and then this browser renders it. So why am I explaining that? Because this FileMaker object that's been added to this web page has only been added to this web page locally in this instance of FileMaker, in this session, in this record, on this layout. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So you're not injecting JavaScript into the server as like a hacker would. You're just injecting it locally onto this layout on this record at this particular session. So if we went into layout mode and back to browse mode, it's wiped out. It's gone. And if you have another machine sitting next to you and you load YouTube, the FileMaker object is not going to be there, and jQuery is not going to be there. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well enough?
Yes, absolutely.
So now we'll get into what that magic jQuery button did that I pressed. Okay. And that is script right here. I have it titled Inject jQuery. Okay, so it's fairly short. It's fairly simple. Here's the entire jQuery library that we've been using all day yesterday in 5 chunks. Here's where we combine it so that all 5 chunks are combined to one variable called jQuery.
Yep.
And here's our famous insert text with a variable target called our JavaScript. And here's the magic. Here's my custom JavaScript that does the work. Okay. So first off, you'll notice something I'm doing interesting here is I'm assigning, again, the assignment symbol is an equal sign, right? That means we're going to assign something. So we're going to assign this function to this object. What is this object? It's the existing FileMaker object. And we're going to add a .jQuery. We're going to add our own method to the FileMaker object. Now, I could, interestingly enough, I could call this FileMaker.performScript, but that would replace FileMaker's existing perform script, and every time I tried to call it past that, it would call my code instead of theirs. So that would really booger things up, right? But that would be an interesting hack. So I'm taking the existing FileMaker object that's in our web viewer that Claris put in there when our layout loaded, record loaded, and I'm adding our own method called jQuery. Well, what is it I'm adding? I'm adding this anonymous function. And you remember anonymous functions don't have a name, but that also means it's going to immediately run. As soon as it loads, all of this is going to run.
So
Okay.
this is, to clarify,
So-
this is going to load Claris's because they inject their own before we ever get to it, right? Those script steps, right? They do their injection.
Right here, these two methods. Yes,
Yeah. So
right
you're
here.
so you're working to make sure you don't wipe theirs out. So you're going to add our.
So I don't give it the same name, right? I give it a unique name.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right.
So while I have this web inspector up and while we're looking at the code, let me just hit this button, come back immediately back into the web inspector and bring up the FileMaker object so you can see it. There it is with its new method, jQuery. So you see the difference between these two lines?
No, I see
This is
that,
before I hit the button. This is after I hit the button.
Go back to that line of code because that's where I would normally say x equals x plus 1, but you did some other magic there. Can you go back to that line where you
Right, and we're going to explain that, but do you kind of see what I've shown you so far? This is what it does. Okay.
We're trying to figure out how you did this.
Now
how did you bake the cake?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. Now we're gonna explain these 4 lines that does the magic, right?
Yes.
Okay. So first off, the same trick that I've played before, which is I want to plop, that what was it, 250K worth of data into this section right here. I want to load a variable with it, with all of that 250K worth of data in here. So I'm going to use the substitute function to do that. So for now, I'm just going to put in this funky little placeholder, 3 stars, jQuery, I'll capitalize 3 stars, right? Because I'm going to use substitute right here. I'm going to use FileMaker substitute to replace that with this. Okay. That makes sense, right? Because we've done that several times. Okay. Next up, I'm going to create that. I'm going to create a function variable or a variable that has the function in it, which has that asking jQuery what the current version is.
Yep.
Okay. So when I run version, it's going to give me back the version number of jQuery. It's going to run that instead. Okay. So those two are kind of simple, but still kind of deep. This is what I'm going to dump to the console log so that we can actually see something. jQuery loaded version number plus then whatever we get here, right?
Right.
And then that version number I'm going to return from this function back to jQuery. And that returning that version string right here is what makes it so that when I'm in the web inspector, that's what you see right here inside double quotes. Okay. So I've inserted jQuery and that's all I had to do it. And now it's sitting here on this web page available for anything on this web page. jQuery is now loaded. It's on this web page.
Real quick.
Kind of simple, but wow.
Scott, you go to layout mode for me real quick. I'm going to answer Scott's question here. So double click on the web viewer. Scott, we just typed in that URL right there. Okay. So we typed in www.youtube.com. If you have one that's loading Wikipedia or something, I mean, the technique you could use anywhere, but in our case, we're just using YouTube, right? So there you go. Cool.
Right. I picked YouTube because it was one of a quick one that I found that didn't have jQuery built in, because a lot of web pages do.
Okay, cool.
So that's why I picked it. So right here, this is loading the web page. It has the FileMaker object there with 2 methods on it that came to us free from Claris, but that's all it's got. When I hit this jQuery button, now it's loaded jQuery into this web page, into the FileMaker object. And now it has a new method called jQuery.
Okay.
And that's it. That's all I've done. So that by itself is pretty powerful. That's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's just crazy. But now I'm going to run, and now I'm going to create some custom JavaScript and add it as well. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to add, in the same way that I've done it before, I'm going to create some JavaScript. I'm going to perform the JavaScript immediately right here in the script so that it just runs. Okay, well, what is it I'm doing? I'm going to create another custom method to the FileMaker object. So we started with 2, then we added a third one called jQuery. Now I'm going to add a 4th one called modify class. And I'm going to pass in another anonymous function, which means it's going to run immediately, not wait for us to call it. It's just going to run. Okay?
So the modify class is a method, right? We're defining a method.
Yeah. Well, we're creating our own method. We're attaching it to the FileMaker object. Yes.
Right. Yes. right? So, but
Yeah, we're not calling one that already exists for us.
correct. We're
Big difference,
defining it.
right?
It's like defining a variable, but we're defining really kind of almost like a function, custom function almost, right? That kind of idea. Okay.
Right. So if that's what I have tied to this button, let's see if it is. It's not. Let me just go back, load the web page. Come on, YouTube. There we go. I'm going to add jQuery to it. Now I'm just going to come and I'm just going to run this script manually. Just run it. Boom, done. So we don't see anything. If I go inspect element and I bring up our web viewer and I look at the FileMaker object, we've added another method.
Oh, there it is. Okay. So you're adding methods to the FileMaker object. Okay, cool. All right. And
because it already exists on the page, right? Yeah.
Right. No, it already.
So we're just tacking on some things to it.
As a reminder, with this get inspect element thing, is that we covered this last week. There was some that was part of the conversation about how to show the kind of the source code of the web viewer in FileMaker, which is normally suppressed and hidden. How to expose it. There were a couple links for that, and so that's last week's conversation. So we're building upon every day. So if you miss a day, then you're gonna have to go back and cover what you missed. So
I think for those of you that have grabbed the jQuery demo file, this one right here that we've been using, if you've already grabbed it and been using it, if you take a look in your scripts, you'll have exactly the same thing that you're seeing here with me live. But one thing has changed, and that is the web page that I'm using right here. I had built this sample file almost 2 months ago, December of last year. And I was using a specific web page. And when I was going through this before class yesterday, making sure that everything still worked, it didn't. There was a few things that broke. So I've had to quickly kind of modify things. And so this custom method that we just created doesn't currently do anything on YouTube. So I mostly just kind of showed this to you so that you can start to see how we can add our own methods to the FileMaker object and do whatever we want. And this runs. But this thing right here looks for a class on the page called tut-button, and it hides it, and that doesn't exist on the YouTube page. Right. So your demo file might actually do something if it's still tied to the old web page. Your mileage may vary, so I'm just going to kind of briefly blow over this script. That's why it's not tied to a button, and I'm going to go to the next one that is tied to a button. Fair enough?
Yeah, we talked about hiding though yesterday and targeting classes and IDs, and things like that. So we're building
so this
what we learned yesterday. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so if you were with us all day yesterday, that line of code right there that we're kind of ignoring now because it doesn't work on YouTube, that actually should make sense to you after yesterday's class. And selecting a class with that name,
and we're is a class.
Triggering.
That's what it is, and the pound sign was
the pound sign was ID, and the dot was class.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And we're telling it to hide. So if it manages to find a class on the page, or even more than one occurrence, it would hide it by running this. But on YouTube, probably not going to do anything. So let's actually get to something that should work. This is the script that's tied to the run button. It's almost identical to the other one. We're going to add yet another method to the FileMaker object. We can add as many as we want as long as we keep them unique, right? And we're going to pass in an anonymous function. Great, no problem. This one looks a little bit more involved, but mostly because this is creating our own custom object called results. And what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a bunch of information from the event and from whatever item is over it, and I'm kind of making my own object. So I've got a key value, bunch of key value pairs, right? I'm creating an object text, an object HTML, an object val, ID, all of that, and I'm going to pass the entire thing to FileMaker. And then we're going to throw that onto the layout so we can see it. Okay, that's really what's going on here. I'm basically, and let's kind of explain this because this is wild. In FileMaker, when you do a find, when you do a query, you all know what a star does, right? Shift 8, that's the wildcard character.
Yeah.
If you plop that into a field, that means find me everything that matches pretty much anything, right? So if you do in a field, if you just put a search by asterisk, it'll find anything that has content. It'll find you everything that's not empty.
It's the opposite of the equal sign, right? Because equal finds you empty, right? So they
yes, very true.
Very true.
So what does this do right here? $, double quote, asterisk. That's a wildcard. That means apply this to everything on the web page. How's that for powerful? What is it we're applying? The hover command. So every single time our mouse hovers over anything on the web page, this function that we're passing in is going to run after our mouse hovers over anything and everything in the web viewer. Okay. So I'm grabbing the event, which in JavaScript terms, typically the event is just represented by a lowercase e. That's why I didn't actually type the word event, is because that's different than code you'll find on the web. So I'm taking the event of, remember, an event, if you recall from yesterday, is any sort of mouse or keyboard happenings, right? So in this case, we're not waiting to click on something. We're just, as soon as my mouse hovers over something, there's going to be an event passed to this function. And I'm actually going to apply some CSS to the object that was hovered over.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a border. Then I'm going to do something with everything that's not part of the event. So this line deals with whatever was hovered over, and this line handles everything that's not being hovered over. That's how I'm using that not sign. So all of this sounds confusing, but let me show you what it does, and then all of a sudden you'll go, oh, okay, I get it. So all of this stuff is happening, some CSS changes. This is creating an object, getting a whole bunch of information on whatever we're hovering over, and I'm passing that information on to FileMaker to display it on the screen. So enough chit chat. Let's actually go see it in action. Okay. So if I haven't done it already, I'm going to hit that jQuery button, then I'm going to hit get data, and that's going to immediately run everything that I just told you. Matter of fact, here's our console that says that it loaded and ran. Okay. But now if we actually go to the web viewer and start hovering over things,
yeah, it's still
you'll notice that.
Yeah, it's still running.
So as I'm hovering, we're getting a red border around objects on the web page. And I'm just hovering, I'm not clicking on anything. Okay. So now let's kind of slow down and look at something. Look at what is off screen off there to the right, below our buttons. You'll notice as I hover, all of that information is instantly changing. It's giving you all that event information on what's being hovered over. I'm grabbing the ID of this section right here. You see the ID center, see the class, style-scope, or year-to-date probably dash masthead. Those are internal IDs and class names on the web page. I'm pulling them right into FileMaker. There's no text, there's no value. There's the inner and outer HTML for this particular object. So you can see over on the right, this doesn't have a whole lot of information tied to it, but you can see the outer HTML down there at the bottom.
Yeah.
I move up here, now we're starting to get a lot of information. So isn't that wild? I just inserted my own custom JavaScript onto this web page here in FileMaker using jQuery. And as you saw, it's not really that many lines of code, right? It's kind of crazy simple. But one of the reasons why this functionality I think is really important to start off with is because when everything else you do in jQuery is typically trying to find objects on a web page. And if you've ever looked underneath the hood at the code that's going on,
oh, it's horrible
for something like YouTube, a lot of lines of stuff, right? I mean, this has 21,000 lines of code. Trying to find something like this is literally trying to find a needle in a haystack. But what is this doing? This is visually moving your mouse to an item that you're interested in and showing over on the right side the ID and the class of it, instead of looking through 21,000 lines of code to try to find it.
It's the modern day screen scrapers, what this is, right? Back in the day.
Yeah.
Right?
So no matter what web page you throw in here, whether it has jQuery or not, you can use these two buttons and you'll start to get all of this data. You can put any web page in here you want besides YouTube.
Yeah, here comes a question. I've noticed that sometimes the HTML and INR values on the right show a different elements info, parentheses, more obvious when using the Wikipedia page. Question, how do you troubleshoot that?
When you start to move your mouse over objects, you'll notice that you have a lot of parent and children issues going on, right? When I moved up here, it did the entire header. Oh, look at that. I mean, that's the body, right? Is that the body? That's like probably the whole entire body or something. And as I get down a little lower, you know, you start to get another child deep, and pretty soon even here you've got an outer button and an inner button. All of those are going to change what you're seeing, right? Because they're all different elements. They're all parents and children, divs and spans, and all sorts of complication stuff on the page. So you really kind of have to play around with looking at what the content is with the web inspector. and then this whole custom, red highlighter around it to try to figure out, okay, this is what I want, but which one is it really? And, you'll get a red border around this, and then you'll get a red border around this. And as you go a little deeper, you'll finally get a red border around this. And it's like, okay, that's the one I want. There's the class name, right? So between this view and this view, you should be able to figure out what it is you're trying to find on a web page. Okay. And that's about as far as I'm going to take that today. We could probably spend hours on this with different examples.
Okay.
But yeah, this is just kind of an exploratory. Wow. I mean, that's not very much code to inject jQuery in our own stuff.
YouTube's pretty hairy as a general rule. So
yeah.
So. All right.
So one of the most common things that we do in a web viewer in FileMaker, especially on somebody else's web page, would probably be a form. Wouldn't you agree?
Yep. I was muted. Yep.
So let's play with a form on a web page that kind of looks familiar.
Okay. Don't embarrass me here. Okay. Just. All right. Here we go. Brace for impact.
All right. So this is my class. This is the registration page for the free JavaScript classes that you're all attending. And some of you have filled out this page, but it has a form with 3 fields, a check mark, a CAPTCHA, and a submit button, right? Well, let's hack the heck out of it. Now, again, this is not going to affect Richard's web server, right? This is only the local occurrence of this page. So the first thing that we can do is actually go and check out, well, we can look at the FileMaker object again, and it just has the standard 2 methods that we're used to seeing, because at this point we haven't added anything, but we know now that we can. But if we looked at jQuery on here, it actually exists. So Richard is actually already using jQuery on this page. But here's the deal. He might not be using the same version of jQuery that I want to use. So I might want to inject my own version of jQuery in here, kind of overriding his, right? It should still do the same thing that he wants it to do, but it might give me some functionality that I want.
So,
because it's
so you wouldn't have 2 versions of jQuery. It would overwrite the one. And okay.
Probably has a lot to do with where it's actually being loaded. And yeah, there's a lot of potential gotchas on that. But from what I can see, the little bit that I've played around with overwriting a current version, I think it just works. So down here, you'll notice we're going to be returning information to FileMaker. So let's hit jQuery and let's get the form. And right now everything's empty. So let's do something like put in some data. Now, Richard has some basic JavaScript already on this page to do things like make sure that you don't have an empty field, and this check mark has to be marked. So if we hit sign up right here, we'll actually get some of his pop-up things, which says, hey, you have to select this checkbox. I noticed that on this page, you don't actually have, it doesn't look like your CAPTCHA is required, at least not the part that I did. So when I hit sign up here, you'll notice, look what we got back into FileMaker from our web form. I could do anything with this that I wanted to. For instance, maybe I could have 3 FileMaker fields here, one for first name, one for last name, one for email, and I could populate that. So I could type it in here and have it populate on the web page and my FileMaker data. That's kind of possibly useful, isn't it? I wouldn't have to type it in twice. So this is where you could have a vendor's web page, type in stuff, and automatically have it auto-enter in FileMaker for you. Now, you'll notice when I hit the sign up button, Richard would normally have that go to another page that would probably be a confirmation, and that data would probably be sent to him. I interrupted the submit button. So when it clicked, it didn't do what Richard anticipated it doing. It just did my stuff. And we're going to go take a look at what that looks like. But that's why it stayed here on this page and didn't go on to another page. I interrupted the standard submit button when it was clicked. It didn't do it didn't do what he had intended it to do. So let's go look at the code. By the way, since we have the web viewer up, let's take a look at the FileMaker object again.
Wait. What did it say? Hijacked? Form submit hijacked.
Yeah. Form submit hijacked. Yeah, you caught that. So here's a new function that I add, a new method that I added. There's the jQuery my version. Here's the get form method that I added to the web page that did all of that. And here's what's being written into the console log, right? jQuery loaded, get form loaded and ran successfully, form submit hijack. That happened as soon as I clicked the submit button. So you can see kind of how I did this. I attached our own private method to the FileMaker object on this page. Now let's go see what all we did there. And that is right here. Now here's where the results come back to FileMaker. So all I'm doing is capturing all the results into a global variable. And then I just have a single, what is that called? A form merge variable on the layout that takes those results and just throws it on the screen. And here I'm just refreshing it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty simple. Here's the JavaScript work. That's it. Okay. So this is the method that I'm adding to the FileMaker object. It's an anonymous function. So as soon as I add it to the web viewer, it immediately runs. Okay. And what I did is using jQuery, I said, hey, find an object in the code that has it's the type form. So that's the parent of the entire form on the whole page, right? And on submit, as soon as that submit button is hit, capture the event, pass it in as a parameter to this anonymous function. And this right here prevents the standard submit functionality on the web page. This prevents the default action on the event on that submit button. So this one line makes it so the submit button doesn't send the information on to RCC and then go on to the next web page. Totally interrupts that whole default process.
But if you were gonna,
one line of code.
Your example, you talked about like peeling off the data and have it going into like a vendor database or whatever, something like that. You could actually have it do your act function and also do the default one at the same time, do both?
Absolutely. Just remove this line. It would do both. So this is where I added to the console log the note form submit hijacked. Here's where I create a custom object. It's a variable called results. It's a constant. So once it's created here, it's not going to change, at least not through this iteration of the function loop, right? It'll get a new result every single time it runs, which in this case, we're only hitting submit once. But on the last example, it's hovering over every object. So every single time it runs, every single time you hover over something new, it's a new trigger, right? So in this case, it's just going to run once. I'm creating key value pairs. The first key is first name. And here's where I'm asking, using jQuery, I'm saying, hey, find an input on the screen, on the form, called first_name. And when you find it, I want the value from it. Give me the value. And then make that the value of my custom object key value pair, with the key being first name. Then I'm doing the same thing with last name, doing the same thing with email, and I'm actually grabbing the input from that check mark. So that'll be returned as a Boolean, right? True or false, whether it was checked or not. And after I create that object, I'm just passing it back to FileMaker to plop into that global variable. Very simple. Holy cow, is that simple, right? And then this is a message variable. I'm dumping that message to the console and I'm returning it to the function in case it wants to be used later, but that's not a requirement. And the end result was filling out a form, hitting the submit button, it comes back to FileMaker right here. And then I can do with it whatever I want.
Very cool.
I hear crickets. I think that's just because everybody's brains are partially exploded and partially daydreaming on what they could do.
Some people are wondering, so if you were like so here's the idea. So people say, well, isn't this a threat to the web page? Or isn't this a threat to the vendor? Remember, he's loading this essentially on a browser on his computer, happens to be in FileMaker, and he's hacking.
It exists only right here. Yeah,
and
it's the only place it exists.
It exists on Leland's computer. So he's not like hacking the HTML web server. He's screwing with his own browser, of which case no one else is using it except for Leland, right? So I could see some people's scrolls going, oh, you hack Richard's site. No, he's hacking the browser, his receptacle on his machine. It doesn't affect anyone else, right?
It's read-only.
Yeah.
It's read-only. I'm not writing any of this out, nor could I. I'm sandboxed. I can't send any of this information back to the server. None of it. If that was happening, our internet just wouldn't work because hackers would have done that years ago, right? They would have hacked every single web page known to man.
Yep.
Somebody would have.
Yeah. So, but this is the kind of stuff that hackers would love to do if they can figure out how to take your code, add their functions to it, and then drop it on your web page so they could peel off copies of everything. That's why you don't want them to be able to write and update your HTML code on your page.
As a FileMaker developer, this is another tool in your tool belt now that you can use if you have a form in a web page, like of a vendor or any web page for any solution you're trying to solve a problem with, to where you may or may not want to interrupt the submit button. But in either case, if you have somebody that needs to do data entry in 2 different places, I've had to do that several times over the last 20, 30 years, where I remember a solution I had in high school with the job I was working at, where we had an IBM over here and a Mac over here. And on the Mac, we were running FileMaker 2, and we had a whole data entry system there for our documents and processes for the office. And then we had another vendor internet type site that we had to log on to using a terminal, and we had to re-enter the exact same data over there. And I figured out a way to automatically pre-fill that. And my boss was thrilled, because now the several people that we had doing data entry only had to do it once instead of twice. They would hit a button and watch the IBM version being filled in for them, because they already filled it in FileMaker.
Perfect.
So that's the kind of stuff that just makes people jump for joy when you're automating something that's very tedious and error prone for data entry, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is an example of getting form data. Okay. The next section plays around with adding content. So we're going to use the same form, but we're going to, number one, we're going to inject jQuery on this site. So now jQuery is there with our version.
The newest.
And now we're going to hit this button. Sorry, yeah, the newer version. And I'm going to hit this button here, and the web page just changed. It did a couple things. Number one, it added values from FileMaker into the first name and last name field. I pre-added values. So if I already had data over here in FileMaker, I can pre-populate that field with that data, right? Then I changed the CSS of the first name field to make it red text and a green background, just to show you I could. Whether you do that or not, it's entirely up to you. And I also added a button or an image, right? And if I click that, I get a pop-up. Leland says this field is not where you enter the customer's first name, is where you enter the customer's first name and not your own, please. So that could be a note to staff, right? And that's a custom button that I added to this web page in this session, only it does not go back to the web server. No other computer out on the planet anywhere shows this same thing on this web page. It's just this occurrence.
Yeah, but you should be able to, isn't this kind of like a hacker robot where you have a, like the robots that are always trying to sell you, you're going to make $4,786 this week if you come to this job link, and it's in the middle of some conversation you're having, right? That's why we have the CAPTCHA, but you're saying the CAPTCHA is not required. So could you submit? So you got Leland. Yeah, see if you could submit.
So I'll hit this check mark and hit sign up, and it goes without the CAPTCHA.
Okay, so I'm not sure that went in the database because Jacob says the CAPTCHA is required, but I'm sure after having his spewed on the internet, he will be whatever limitations or errors that he has will be fixed.
Quickly resolved.
Quickly resolved, I am sure. He says it didn't submit. No record was created in FileMaker.
Oh, interesting. So
now,
to the user, it looked like it went, but it didn't actually.
Now, for fun, just go and do it again, but do the robot. Let's just see if it goes all the way through. He's actually here monitoring the database. So as you're doing shenanigans, he's monitoring your level of shenaniganry. All right, so hit I'm not a robot, sign up. Oh, see, now you got the confirmation. So I'm thinking it went through that time. Yes, it went in. So yeah, so there you go. So ideally, he would have an error message say, hey, asshole, thanks for trying to hack the page, but since you're a robot, you're not allowed.
So looking at the code of what's being added and how that's being added, I've got one line here that's disabled. I'm going to go ahead and enable that, exit that, save the script, go back and rerun, add content. And what I did is I added an image to a specific couple different places here. So yeah, I mean, you can add anything, right? So that was kind of an example of adding an image rather than, I mean, technically this little button right here is an image as well. But now if we go back and look at that code. So we're adding our own custom method to the FileMaker object. It's passing in an anonymous function. And we've got several things that we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is this one line of code. It's going to look for an input object on the page with a name, first name. And if it finds it, or any occurrence of it, it's going to change the CSS of it to text color red, background green. Right? You saw that. Totally makes sense. So that line does that. This is where we actually input values, text values. So it's looking for an input on the screen with the name, first name, and if and when it finds it, it's changing its value to whatever I pass in. And then I'm doing the same thing for the last name field. So 2 lines of code does that. Oh, there was one thing I didn't show you. Let's go back to it and show you that first. If you're in this field right here, hello Mutta, and you tab out of it, it goes all caps. So if we go back and code and look at that, here's what did that. So what it did is on the input with a name, first name, it added an on blur event type, which means as soon as it loses focus. So while we had the blinking caret in the field, it was focused. As soon as we tabbed out of it, that's a blur event. And when that happened, we passed in this function as far as what we want it to do. And what we did is we used something kind of unique, which is we used jQuery to do a search for the keyword this. And all that does is it says, whatever that event, whatever object the event was triggered on, that's what this object points to. So we don't have to actually know its name. Because that on blur can be if we had put a wildcard on here, right? This would be how you could reference every single one of those with a wildcard, would be with this keyword. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I don't think I explained it very well. We're changing its value to this function. And oops, I'm moving things around here. And this function takes in a parameter of the index and the value. That's kind of convoluted and complicated, but what we're doing is we're returning the same value, but to uppercase. So we're taking whatever the existing value is and just making it all uppercase.
So to uppercase, this is kind of a reserved command, I guess, or something formatting. And
that's a method. That's a method on the of the input element first name.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, in documentation, you could look that up, right? So if we were looking at W3 schools, this is HTML methods. Let's take a look at probably effects. And what's the one we were looking for? We're looking for forgot what I was even looking for now. To uppercase. Yes. Doesn't look like that's an effect. Is that an event? No. Is that HTML? No, I'm not seeing it. Guess we'll have to search for it. To uppercase. Stay within W3. There it is. It's a method. Down here. Yeah, here's the string to uppercase. So it's a string method. So as long as your variable is a string, then you can call this method on it, and it will convert that string to all uppercase. So yeah, this, again, W3 schools, lots of reference material. These are all the methods you can call on a string. So FileMaker has a lot of string functions, but JavaScript might have a few more or similar ones or whatnot. So
that's why the uppercase is, I recognize that as a FileMaker thing. So yeah.
So that did that. This one line here added that image of Richard to several places on the page. Why did it go to several places? Because it was added to the end of every single class that had a name of container-12. So evidently there was at least 3 container-12 classes on there on the web page. So we got 3 new images appended to it. This right here is all CSS added to the header. And what it does is it describes that whole pop-up little text tool that said Leland says to do this instead of that. This is the CSS that defines what that looks like. And we added it to the header by finding the header and appending this entire string to it, which is nothing but CSS. You can see the style type text CSS and then all of the stuff. That was me copying and pasting from a web page for tooltips. This right here adds our custom class pop-up, which is defined here in this CSS. We're adding a class to the form itself. And then this is that image of the question mark that when we clicked on it, made the pop-up show up, prepending that to this div on the web page. So that's why the form had that big question mark sitting there. This is how we added that. And this, when you click on it, logs to the console, pop-up toggled. And this is the one line that turns the CSS that says initially hide invisible to actually show it. So it looks more complicated than it is. Hopefully between the comments and what you've learned so far, if you're wandering through this on the demo file, hopefully you can kind of take it a step at a time, add and remove things, comment things out.
All sorts of questions all over the place. Go ahead, Margaret. Yeah, jump in.
I was going to read it. The pop-up isn't working for me. Will we learn how to troubleshoot JavaScript either this week or in paid training?
What you might be dealing with is I think that pop-up for me did not work until I hit my version of jQuery on the site. So if you hit that jQuery, add content, you should get the question mark button. As soon as you move your mouse over it, it should turn into a hand. So I'm going to go into layout mode, browse mode, fresh copy of the web page. I'm going to hit jQuery button. I'm going to hit add content button. I get this little pop-up here. When I click it, this text should appear up here. But for me, I don't think that worked without me hitting jQuery. Let me go back and test that. Layout mode, browse mode to clear it. I'm not going to hit that button. I'm just going to hit add content. I get the image. When I click on it, nope, it still worked. There was something I did before where I wasn't getting that pop-up. My question would be, what version of FileMaker are you on? That'd be where I would start. I think 19.3 is the minimum version, I think. I will tell you that as of yesterday, when I was trying to change web pages, because before yesterday, I was not using RCC's registration page. I was using another form I found out in the wild. And I had been doing this, and I got the pop-up to finally work. When I moved over to using this fmtraining.tv registration page and was trying to do the pop-up, I was having lots of errors. And in code, I finally got it to work. So if you're using the old version of the jQuery demo page, if you got that prior to 5 minutes ago, that's probably why it's not working. The code under the hood is probably still looking for form elements on that other web page that you're probably seeing as well, because you're probably not seeing this web page, right?
Okay.
And so you're right. I think out of all of the things I'm trying to do here, the pop-up was the most finicky. So I would say if everything else works, go with that. The pop-up is that's pretty complicated. So if it's not working, you might even blow past it. So with what I'm showing on the screen right now, everything that's highlighted is all that's required for that pop-up. I mean, it's overkill. It's extremely complex. It's very finicky. It's easy to break. So if this part doesn't work for you, man, I would say count your blessings and move on. Because I was trying to get it to work, finally kind of got it to work, but it was painful even for me to play with. So, but the everything else here that you've seen on this page, as far as adding content, that was pretty straightforward and easy to do. We got one more thing to do, and it's short and sweet, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Okay.
This one was using a form, but being a little mischievous, like maybe on April Fool's Day, to add a little prank. So if you hit jQuery here, hit add prank, then you come down here to this form and, oh, I want to fill this form in. Let me click in here in first name and, hey, where'd it go? Okay, I'm going to click in last name. Hey, where's it going? Click an email. Oh, it's disappearing. So yeah, what I'm doing is as soon as they're clicking in it, I'm hiding it, right? So now it's not even there. They can't fill it out. So a little bit of things you can do for pranks and whatnot, but that's kind of a wrap on jQuery. Mostly it was, I wanted to find something to where we could kind of add some more, a little bit of JavaScript knowledge to our tool belt of choice. But try to give some real world examples of something you could do with it. jQuery library is such a common one out there out on the web, but it was kind of a challenge to myself. What can we do with it in FileMaker, and where could it be potentially useful? Well, number one, yesterday we spent time looking at how we could have our own custom HTML in a web viewer and then do things with it. Several different ways to select things and modify it and whatnot. And then today's focus was bringing somebody else's web page into our web viewer and then inserting jQuery so that we could do our own JavaScript code there. So I thought that was two good examples of maybe when you might want to use jQuery, besides the coolness of the mouse and keyboard inputs for Pac-Man, right? Not your common everyday use scenario.
The idea of peeling the data off and letting it submit to wherever it was going to go, but also peeling it off towards your database. And so you don't have to do, it's, like double entry, you do single entry. I think that's, to me, if you haven't run into this in the world of business and FileMaker and custom solutions, you haven't been around that long, because this has been on again, off again since first time I saw it was probably 95 or 96. And that's when the internet was really starting to take off, and we had ISDN lines and modems were still a thing and all that kind of stuff.
So I suppose one thing I could kind of go back and just kind of show, because I didn't, if we go back to that get data where we started with YouTube, if we go and replace YouTube with your web registration page, it's a lot less complicated. And so if we hit jQuery and get data, now as you move your mouse over it and you come down here and look at that first name field, look off to the right, there's the ID. There's the different classes that it subscribes to. So this tool is what can really aid you when it comes to, okay, I've got a vendor form here. I've looked at the web inspector and good golly, it's complicated. And how am I going to find the form? How am I going to find the first and last name field? What are they calling them? What's the ID so that I can use jQuery to pull the data out of it? This tool right here should help you with that. Visually can see every single piece in the web page, and over on the right into FileMaker comes all of that information for each one of those elements, right? So
everyone, welcome once again to the end of the show. I'm going to remind you that tomorrow we're going to continue that conversation. It's actually a new file tomorrow. Tomorrow's a new file?
Yes, tomorrow is 103. It's a whole new topic. We're going to use a new library that's fairly common. I've used it a lot. And you're going to build from scratch some functionality using that library. And you're also going to get a finished tool that you can use even if you don't want to use any of the JavaScript or write anything on your own. So that one demo file will have both the step-by-step instructions that you're going to follow along in the classwork for the next 3 or 4 days. And you'll also get a finished working product that tomorrow, at the beginning of the show, we will demo so that you can see what it is that we're going to end up with.
Okay, perfect. Well, by the way, for those wondering how all this happened,
quickly,
is that Leland said, well, I want to do this JavaScript training. I said, well, you need to have kind of an outline and some sample files. And so back in December is why I think some of you, if you want to come to the React training and kind of reward him for his hard work, he worked a bunch in December building this curriculum, building this sample file, building this stuff so you would have this material so it's coherent presentation. Because I told him I wouldn't get to schedule it until he had his together, which he does. The files make a lot of sense. They're very straightforward. They build, they make sense. Margaret will post the updated one here momentarily. But yeah, and then tomorrow we start the third free section of training, which will be file number 3. Do you use the React framework? Yeah, that's a question.
Now, are they asking that because React is different than React Native? Is that why they're asking that?
I don't.
Facebook made React initially for just the web, just their web page. And then later, about a year later, they quietly were developing a mobile version and released that out into the wild, and they called that React Native. So that's the difference. Okay. React is for web, React Native is for mobile.
Okay, and so in the training next week, which is paid training, not next week, next week, right? Starts Monday afternoon next week. That's the paid training where we'll be doing React Native. React Native versus React, I mean, how big of a difference? I guess I should ask the question. Does it matter?
Well, it's two different audiences, right? So your end result is completely different.
Okay, good.
There's a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover, but it's two different children for sure.
All right, cool. All right, well, that's it. I appreciate everyone. We'll catch you tomorrow. Thanks. See ya. Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.